Rebastinib is a switch control inhibitor of TIE2, and TIE2 is involved in the angiogenesis, but TIE2 may have some other effects on the tumor microenvironment, including actually a potential effect on M2 macrophages, which may modulate tumor microenvironment and may have a favorable impact on potential resistance to chemotherapy. So the preclinical data supporting actually putting these two drugs together. This study was not the first in man experience. There has been some effort to combine Rebastinib with Paclitaxel before, which actually suggested in breast cancer that there is interesting efficacy. So this study was designed as a kind of a dose confirmation study. So we initially ran the phase 1 part, which was designed in slightly out-of-the-box way, in which we essentially had 2 dose levels. We were simultaneously enrolling a relatively large number of patients into both dose levels, which used different dose of Rebastinib, either 50 milligrams twice a day or 100 milligrams twice a day. And essentially, at the end of that process, we look at both dose levels and just decided which dose would be more suitable to move forward. And this part was done in pretty much like a tumor agnostic fashion, with subsequent planned phase 2 expansions and multiple target histologies, which included triple negative breast cancer, inflammatory breast cancer, platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, gynecological carcinosarcoma. So what we are presenting at ASCO is actually the endometrial cohort, which is looking quite promising. And this was done using so-called Simon two-stage design. So you have to enroll a certain number of patients. If you see expected level of activity, then you are actually allowed to enroll additional number of patients. So initially, we enrolled 18 patients, and the pre-specified criteria were that we had to see at least 5 responses, meaning complete or partial responses, in order to enroll 15 additional patients. As you can see, this criteria the bar was relatively high, but was met in this situation. And we actually enrolled a total of 38 patients in the cohort, in which 33 actually received dosing and were actually in the modified intent to treat population, which was used for the analysis. We also had to do some adjustments with the dosing, because even though from the initial dose confirmation phase, it turned out that 100 milligram BID should be safe. We have been actually experiencing across the study some episodes of muscle weakness, which was deemed to be related to Rebastinib. So ultimately, specifically for this cohort, 16 patients started with 100 milligrams twice a day, but ultimately the remaining patients actually received 50 milligrams twice a day. The reason why we had safety population of 38 patients, which is 38 patients which received dosing, while the modified intent to treat population was 33 patients, was because there were 2 patients who discontinued medication due to unrelated AEs. 2 patients actually had some eligibility criteria issues, and 1 patient withdrew the consent. So that's actually the 5 patients which were not included were excluded from the modified intent to treat analysis. So overall, it was a population which was heavily pretreated. What I think is important for other people to know, that actually all patients received prior Paclitaxel. So it was a population which was 100% pretreated with Paclitaxel. And in addition to that, actually 8% of patients also received docetaxel. So it was a heavily taxane pretreated population. The median number of prior therapies was 3, which really is quite a lot. There are not that many options for this specific disease. And about 45% of patients actually received 4 or more regimens. So again, heavily patient population, which was actually heavily pretreated. We have actually seen interesting signals of activity. The partial responses were seen in 11 patients, which was 33% of the patients in the modified intent to treat population. The confirmed partial responses were about in 24%. So that's relatively significant level of activity for this heavily pretreated population. The clinical benefit rate, which essentially kind of combines the complete response, partial response, and stable disease, essentially anything else other than progression, at 8 weeks was 69.7%, and at 16 weeks, it was still 54.5%. So that kind of suggests that some of the responses were quite durable. In fact, there are still patients, some of the responders are still on therapy, continuing really for nearly a year and a half or even more than a year and a half on therapy. The median progression-free survival was about 6.2 months. So which is again quite favorable in this patient population. I didn't necessarily comment on safety, so maybe I should just have a few comments on that. So the most side effects were actually grade 1 and grade 2, and the most frequent were like fatigue, constipation, edema, nausea, peripheral neuropathy. Again, in the vast majority of cases, grade 1, grade 2. We have seen some grade 3 or worse AEs, which were attributed to the study drug. I would again mention the muscular weakness, which happened in about 10.5% of patients. It's an AE which is, I don't necessarily say we fully understand the mechanism, but it's something which, if noted, can be quite effectively managed with dose interruptions, typically followed by dose reductions, although sometimes patients are able to resume the same dose. And it's not necessarily prohibitive, but it's something which in the future development would obviously need to be paid attention to. We also had, if I kind of mention more frequent side effects, which were grade 3 or higher, I mean, hypertension was also one of them. Again, that's not surprising since type 2 is involved in angiogenesis, and we know that anti-angiogenic agents can have this type of side effects. Again, the hypertension can be successfully managed with anti-hypertensive therapies. So I think, given the landscape of endometrial cancer, I think this therapy looks promising, and in my opinion, does deserve more investigation in this field, with a potential that it might ultimately have a pathway to the standard of care.